First, there will be one-on-one talks, and only after that with me. Trump announced a meeting between Zelensky and Putin. France, Germany, and the United Kingdom want to deploy their troops in Ukraine as part of security guarantees. How will Russia respond? Putin made a bold move. His loyal henchman Lavrov stated that neither Crimea nor Donbass were ever Russia's goal. The first video has appeared showing the combat launches of the Ukrainian Flamingo missile at targets on Russian territory, along with stunning footage of a Russian fuel train being destroyed by long-range FPV drones. We'll tell and show you everything right now. In the meantime, subscribe to the Ukraine Today channel. Please give this episode a like. He doesn't want to anger Trump, and he's afraid of Zelensky. Russian dictator Vladimir Putin proposed holding a meeting with the president of Ukraine in Moscow. The Ukrainian leader refused. This was reported by the Agence France-Presse. As the publication notes, during negotiations with US President Donald Trump on August 18th, Putin suggested organizing a bilateral meeting with Zelensky in Moscow. Putin remembered Moscow, a source told the publication. The Ukrainian president, who at that moment was next to Trump in the White House along with European leaders, replied no. Well, Putin's tricks once again prove that he is afraid of direct talks with Zelensky and will delay this moment as long as possible. For now, everyone is discussing the results of the talks between Trump, Zelensky, and the EU leaders. Trump himself stated that he had a good meeting with the president of Ukraine and his European colleagues, and is working on organizing a meeting between Russian leader Vladimir Putin and Zelensky, as well as a trilateral meeting. All the details of the summit in Washington are in our international review.
A meeting between Zelensky and 7 European leaders took place at the White House. For the first time, Trump spoke about security guarantees that the US is ready to provide to Ukraine. Previously, he had placed this responsibility entirely on Europe.
We will announce this later. We are also meeting with 7 leaders of great countries and will discuss this. They will all be involved, and there will be a lot of assistance when it comes to security. They are the first line of defense because they are there, that's Europe. But we are also going to help them. We will participate. We are providing good protection, very good security.
By guarantees, what is meant is something similar to NATO's Article 5, where all participants commit to deploying troops to defend a country in the event of aggression against it.
I am glad that we are starting with a proposal that is modeled after NATO's Article 5, and that this proposal initially came from Italy. This is what we must do for the sake of peace and to protect the security of our country.
The meeting in the Oval Office, the part that was public, really went well, especially in contrast to the previous meeting at the end of February. Therefore, at this point, it is clear that the main and probably the biggest advantage is the formation of a unified coalition around Ukraine made up of European countries. And it is also clear that this strengthens Kyiv's position in negotiations with Washington.
Trump stated that he no longer considers a temporary ceasefire, and now the main priority is a long-term peace agreement.
I don't think a ceasefire is necessary. If you look at the 6 agreements I've made this year, all of them were during wartime. I haven't made any truces. Maybe that would be good, but we can reach a lasting peace agreement by working on it while they are fighting and have to keep fighting. I would like them to stop, but strategically it is not advantageous for either side.
At the same time, European leaders want a ceasefire by the next meeting in order to see the reality of Putin's intentions.
Honestly, we would all genuinely like to see a complete ceasefire by the next crucial meeting. I truly cannot imagine the next important meeting taking place without a comprehensive ceasefire. Let's diligently work on this and apply significant pressure on Russia.
The US president also stated that he would organize a meeting between Zelensky and Putin. According to him, in 2 weeks it will be clear whether the war will end.
I will organize a meeting with Putin, and if you want, I will come to that meeting. It's not that I want to, but I will do it because we want to save many people from dying. And in a short period of time, in a week or 2, we will find out whether we can solve this problem or if this terrible conflict will continue.
Indeed, the main problem with the perception and analysis of this meeting is that very little concrete information was made public. There were statements about security guarantees, about a potential military contingent from the Allies, and many other things concerning both weaponry and political support for Ukraine. But the fact remains that most of the important aspects of these negotiations stayed behind closed doors.
During the meeting, Trump spoke on the phone with Putin. As a result, the German chancellor said that a meeting between Putin and Zelensky is already being planned.
During the break, the American president called the Russian president, and they agreed that there would be a meeting between the presidents of Russia and Ukraine within the next 2 weeks. The location of the meeting is being coordinated.
Zelensky also stated that his conversation with Trump went excellently and that it was Putin himself who proposed the bilateral meeting.
I would like to thank President Trump for this meeting. This was our best meeting, and that's important. Russia first proposed a bilateral meeting between Ukraine and Russia and then a trilateral one. We are ready for a bilateral meeting with Putin.
The White House even prepared a map of the occupied Ukrainian territories. After the meeting in Alaska, Trump repeatedly raised the issue of territorial exchanges, without specifying which territories exactly.
1,000 days ago, only 1% of our territories were occupied by the Russians. People think it's 20%. And this slightly shifts the focus toward the truth and reality and changes the balance of what strength the Russian army has compared to our army. And that's why the issue of territories is a question that we will leave between me and Putin.
Zelensky said that Trump will help negotiate an all-for-all prisoner exchange and is also willing to sell Ukraine a large package of weapons.
There really is a package with our proposals worth $90 billion. This is the second part of security guarantees for us. The third part is our drone production. We have an agreement with the President of the United States that when exports open up, they will buy our drones.
At the same time, there are still absolutely no signs that Putin is truly ready for peace, rather than just stalling once again to continue his so-called movement.
The Kremlin made a move with Lavrov. Putin's henchmen stated that neither Crimea nor Donbas were ever Russia's goal. Our goal was to protect Russian people, said the Russian foreign minister in an interview with the Russia 24 TV channel. They protected them, as they say, as best they could. Occupied cities turned into ruins by Putin's troops, and hundreds of thousands of lives destroyed and ruined those very Russian people who had previously lived and worked peacefully in Ukraine. As the saying goes, you can't understand Russia with reason. But why exactly has Putin made this move on the chessboard right now? Is he really backing down or just covering his tracks? I think we'll find out in the coming days. The first video has appeared showing the Ukrainian Flamingo missile being launched at targets on Russian territory. You remember, on the eve of Zelensky's visit to Washington, Ukraine released photos and some technical specifications of its new cruise missile. The enemy is in for a very unpleasant surprise. All the details coming up in just a minute. Ukraine has also announced the destruction of another station on the Druzhba oil pipeline in the Tambov region. And now a fourth major Russian oil refinery has halted oil processing due to a drone strike. All the details are coming up in the report.
Flamingo in action. Footage of the new cruise missile being used has appeared online. When developing the missile, engineers focused on three main factors: flight range, warhead power, and deployment speed before launch.
In any case, these missiles will undergo further modifications. I want to believe that this year we'll be able to reach at least 70 or 80 units per month. And as for the 3,000-kilometer range, well, I wouldn't take that figure too seriously. I think those numbers are more for publicity. Believe me, 1,000 is already more than enough for us. Within a 3,000-kilometer radius, there are a huge number of Russian targets that need to be reached.
But while the missiles are still in production, the Ukrainian armed forces are successfully striking targets on the aggressor country's territory using other means. Unmanned systems forces struck the Nikolskaya oil pumping station in the Tambov region, resulting in a complete halt of oil transportation through the main Druzhba pipeline. Additionally, about 10 explosions thundered in the sky over Volgograd and a fire broke out again at the oil refinery.
It seems like it fell somewhere over the... There's another one! I don't know if you could see it or not.
The Volgograd oil refinery is one of the 10 largest in Russia and is considered a key fuel producer in the southern federal district. But thanks to the good drones, oil processing at the Volgograd refinery has been successfully halted at least until mid-September. The Syzran oil refinery in the Samara region also halted production due to drone strikes.
Ah, I have truly got it now. Here is yet another one just for you to carefully consider and ponder upon. Another one is flying.
Apparently, we are seeing the first results of these months-long efforts, these months-long actions. This is the rise in prices at gas station signs. This is the disappearance of fuel from sale and sales only by coupons. Yes, for now this only affects the DNR, the pseudo-entities, it affects Crimea and certain regions of the Chita region. But in principle, it's a good sign. It shows that we're on the right track and we need to keep going.
And while Russia is burning and ablaze, Ukraine is preparing a weapons deal with the US worth $100 billion. Kyiv may acquire American weapons financed by Europe in order to obtain security guarantees from the US after a peace agreement with Russia. Additionally, Kyiv and Washington may sign a $50 billion agreement for drone production with Ukrainian companies.
Everything will be conceptual, very appealing, and primarily aimed at the main donor for Trump. He needed to be A. hooked, B. kept within Ukraine's sphere of interest. In other words, what the Russian Federation did not achieve was, first, a split among Ukraine's allies, and second, it did not get the American leader into its bloody hands as an ally who, together with Russia, would pressure Ukraine so that it would be Zelensky who stops this war. Well, we know by what means.
Even if this is only a prospect for the future, coalition members have already firmly declared their readiness to deploy deterrence forces in Ukraine after the war ends. According to Volodymyr Zelensky, the plan is to involve about 30 countries, but their commitments will differ. Some may consider the issue of military presence, while others will provide intelligence and other support.
There are no volunteers willing to send their troops. After the war ends, after a peace treaty is signed, of course, there will be a few more willing participants, because why? Because it will already be within the framework of A, a signed peace treaty, B, it will no longer be a war for Russia's territorial integrity, but rather a joint struggle against a common enemy. With 99.9% probability, it will be under UN auspices. When the UN Security Council convenes and votes on sending a peacekeeping contingent to Ukraine in the amount of and determines the number.
Meanwhile, on the front, the Ukrainian armed forces have advanced. Over the past 2 weeks, the defense forces have cleared a number of settlements in the Donetsk region and inflicted significant losses on the enemy in both manpower and equipment. Moreover, fewer and fewer people are willing to fight for Putin's army. In Russia, the rate of recruiting new soldiers for the war against Ukraine has dropped significantly. In the second quarter of 2025, the number of Russians who signed contracts with the Ministry of Defense was the lowest in the past 2 years.
If we assume that this is the case throughout the entire territory of the Russian Federation, then this is a very strong signal, which most likely means several things. First, the enthusiasts of the Russian world who initially volunteered for free have run out, and so have the outcasts who were willing to do anything for money. Basically, that segment of the population has disappeared. And apparently, we are reaching the point where the Russian Federation is running out of money specifically to buy, cannon fodder for the Russian army.
Only in Russia, of course, will they skillfully hide this and claim that there are millions of people ready to die for Putin.
In 1,010 days of war, the occupying army has captured less than 1% of Ukrainian territory. This is the statistic provided by Commander-in-Chief Syrsky, and this completely refutes the Kremlin's claims of major Russian successes at the front. After all, the main seizure of Ukrainian land by the aggressor country's army was achieved only in the first days of the full-scale invasion, after which it has essentially been stuck in place, as the numbers inexorably show. Details in our report.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Armata the
1,273 days of the large-scale Russian-Ukrainian war, almost 3.5 years of daily battles, artillery shelling, drone attacks, and thousands of casualties. But the result, if you look at the map of hostilities, speaks for itself. Moscow, which once boasted it would take Kyiv in 72 hours, has, after 1,010 days of bloody fighting, captured less than 1% of Ukrainian territory. These are the conclusions reached by deep state analysts.
Starting from November 12, 2022, as of today, 108,651 square kilometers are occupied. As of today, that figure is 114,493 square kilometers. The enemy has occupied 5,842 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory. This amounts to 0.96% of the total area of the Ukrainian state within its internationally recognized borders. Deep state.
The Russians did indeed achieve significant operational successes, but that was in the first weeks of the invasion, when Ukraine was physically unprepared to face what was once considered the world's second strongest army, which was advancing simultaneously in all directions. In those days, the enemy managed to capture Kherson, Mariupol, and parts of the Kyiv, Chernihiv, and Sumy regions.
Everyone realized that they needed to start digging in immediately. At the very least, after losing the Kharkiv region, the Russian Federation clearly realized that you can't secure victory on the move. Well, from their side, if you want to hold ground, you have to dig in. And all this digging in, all these positions, leveled out the major problems that existed at the start of the war. At first, Russia broke through our defenses in a massive way. Then Ukraine pushed the Russian Federation back, and after that, everyone shifted to more or less positional combat. Dugouts, trenches, forests, tree lines. And that's how the fighting is conducted now.
But the subsequent counter-offensives by the Ukrainian armed forces pushed the occupiers back by dozens of kilometers, turning the tide of the war. Since November 12, 2022, the front has stabilized. Russia is now continuing its offensive attempts, but not on such a large scale. The enemy is storming the positions of the Ukrainian armed forces, hoping to grab at least a little Ukrainian land. Bakhmut, Avdiivka, Kupiansk, Chasiv Yar, Rabotino. Thousands of attempts to storm the trenches, but the advances are minimal, sometimes 300, sometimes 500 meters. Hundreds of thousands of Russian soldiers have been lost, but the strategic picture has hardly changed. Now the enemy is conducting mainly local offensive actions, pressure, attrition, destruction of infantry and equipment. However, the Russian dictator has not been able to seize significant territories.
Despite these losses, which continue to grow, every kilometer and every position captured costs him more and more killed and wounded each time. The statistics bear this out. First, the pace of his offensive has slowed significantly. Second, the level of losses is extremely high. Yet they persistently try to achieve the goals they have set for themselves.
They lack resources, they lack strength, they lack capabilities. All those things they boasted about so much before the war turned out to be nothing. Why has there been a purge of generals in the Russian Federation? This is dictator Putin's direct revenge on all the military generals who, for many years, convinced him that our weapons have no equal, that everything is prepared, everything is great. But as it turned out of this entire million-strong army, only about 170,000 people were ready to fight at the very start of the war. That's it. None of the others were ready. There was no proper communication, no equipment, not enough ammunition. None of that was there. Everything had been sold off, everything had been stolen, and now this enormous revenge, this huge punitive machine that punishes generals for this deception, once again shows that the Russian military machine, by and large, is just a puff of smoke. Yes, there are people, yes, there are determined allies, Iran, North Korea, but the Russian Federation itself cannot cope with Ukraine.
Ukraine is already definitely the winner in this war. Even under conditions of shell shortages and the aggressor country's superiority in manpower and aviation, Ukrainian defense remains resilient. The successes of the Russians are far less than what Kremlin propagandists claim. Their soldiers are being destroyed on the front by the tens of thousands. Their equipment burns on the battlefields, and the goals of the aggressor's army are collapsing under the blows of the Ukrainian army.
Soon they'll start brainwashing people from the cradle. Starting September 1st, conversations about important things will begin to be held even in kindergartens. For now, this will happen in 22 regions, including Moscow. Children aged 3 to 7 will discuss the values of family and friendship, as well as talk about love for the motherland. Meanwhile, in the State Duma, they're proposing to ban children from having mobile phones in camps so they won't be distracted from patriotism. This proposal was made to the Minister of Education, Sergei Kravtsov, by Tatiana Butskaya, a deputy from United Russia. More details about all this craziness coming up.
And the State Duma isn't sleeping. They've now decided to come up with a way to save children from the internet. Deputy Tatiana Butskaya has proposed banning mobile phones in children's camps.
It's a great country where the president cares so much about children.
The idea is simple: less internet, more patriotism. Now the camp is turning not into a place for rest, but for proper upbringing.
As they say, there are camps and then there are camps. I think nowadays you wouldn't want to go to just any camp. Besides, camps these days are not a cheap pleasure. And especially if they ban phones, well, I don't know where today's teenager would go if they're not allowed to use a phone. The answer: nowhere. It's just not serious.
Butskaya explained her initiative simply. Parents complain that their children are always glued to their phones. So instead of coming up with interesting activities for the kids, they just decided to take away their gadgets.
Of course, kids don't want to listen to all this patriotism, but there's another reason to take away their phones. Yes, if kids write to their parents, and this happens often, that something's wrong at camp, like they're not being fed properly, or something else is going on with them, or something else entirely. And accordingly, parents come, get upset, and even take their children out of the camp.
You'd think they'd just let the child enjoy their childhood. But no, now even camps are about control, discipline, and life without the internet.
It's much easier to sell this to kids when it's packaged like that, yeah. So if you just drone on about important things in class, everyone will just tune it out. But if you wrap it up nicely, singing songs around the campfire, this and that, then you see it sinks in much deeper. So it turns out that just like in Soviet times, it's better to minimize a child's interaction with the state itself.
So a phone at camp isn't just a toy, it's a window to reality. And that's exactly what officials are most afraid of. Because there, a child can see that the world is much bigger than the state's program for fostering patriotism.
Here, our problem isn't with phones or even with the camps themselves. The real and pressing problem, in fact, lies squarely with today's current Russian government, specifically with the present presidential administration, which is actively trying to construct not even an ideological state, because this isn't a true ideology in any meaningful sense, but simply a brutal tyranny, a complete and utter despotism, where the primary and most crucial thing they relentlessly want to drill into children from the very youngest age is the absolute and unquestioning necessity that they must always obey authority without hesitation.
So the state has decided to save children from the internet, and adults will be able to proudly say, "See, we protected you from TikTok and likes." But here's the question, did the children themselves even ask to be saved? But if you thought that was all, it isn't. Now, these important conversations will also be introduced in kindergartens.
The powerful Russian state will always steadfastly support you in all your significant endeavors, so that you can truly be proud of your beloved country, and your cherished country can, in turn, be immensely proud of you, its dedicated citizens.
The Ministry of Education has decided that children from 3 to 7 years old will be very interested in listening to monotonous, important conversations lessons.
Well, let's imagine a child is 3 years old. And what are they going to explain to them? That you can walk up to the sandbox, hit another child on the head, and take their toy mold? Is that what they're going to explain? Well, actually, parents might get a bit anxious about that. But if they explain something else to the child, that you shouldn't hit another child on the head, you shouldn't take their toy mold, let them play with theirs and you play with yours. Then how, when they grow up, are you going to explain to them that it's okay to attack a neighboring country and try to take everything from it?
At kindergarten, there are talks about important things, and at camp, life without a phone. The care for children is total. Let them be bored, at least it's the right way.
The State Duma hasn't forgotten about Russian pensioners either. Russian citizens, perhaps, haven't done enough for the state to receive a pension from it, according to State Duma deputy and Olympic figure skating champion Irina Rodnina. According to 75-year-old Rodnina, who previously stated that her pension does not exceed 30,000 rubles, just like an average Russian person, a pension is not a salary, but rather an old age benefit. You can find all the details in our next segment. Please don't forget to like this episode and subscribe to the YouTube channel Ukraine Today. And set
Russian citizens may not have done enough for the state to deserve a pension from it, according to State Duma deputy and Olympic figure skating champion Irina Rodnina.
In Russia, if there are any noticeable and significant delays in pension payments, it could potentially drive pensioners out into the streets. And these people are precisely Putin's core electorate. Therefore, without a doubt, pensions will stop increasing. Undoubtedly, in real terms, pensions will be reduced. But the authorities simply won't dare to cut pensions drastically.
It is worth noting that Rodnina herself is already a pensioner. At 75 years old, she claims to receive no more than 30,000 in pension, and she describes this amount as normal for a Russian person.
Well, for example, pensions are much higher for Muscovites because there is a Moscow supplement. And in fact, the average pension in Moscow is probably around 30,000 rubles.
The farther you are from the Russian capital, the lower people's pension payments are accordingly.
This, of course, it's hard to even call it a subsistence minimum. Considering the constant rise in utility tariffs, the ongoing increase in public transportation fares, not to mention the prices of groceries in stores and, of course, medicines at pharmacies.
But according to Irina Rodnina, you can't always rely on someone else. In this case, let's clarify, the state. The Russian politician urges pensioners to be independent from their pensions, noting that there are already enough benefits and concessions for the elderly in Russia.
If we look at the pension system of the Russian Federation, it is largely inherited from Soviet times when, in fact, the working population pays for the pensioners. And given that the number of working people is constantly decreasing while the number of pensioners, on the contrary, is increasing, the situation is becoming more and more acute.
Deputy Rodnina never considered whether the money paid by the state would be enough for her if she had to live on a single pension. At the same time, it's unlikely that the figure skater pensioner is living solely on her pension.
Military personnel, FSB officers, police officers, and of course deputies who also receive a certain bonus for their rank.
But what does a pension mean to Rodnina if she earns millions, unlike ordinary Russians? In the pre-war year of 2021, the official income of the former figure skater exceeded 11 million rubles, while 33 million of her fellow citizens survive on an ordinary pension without any supplements.